Good day, everyone, and welcome to Different Stages Radio. I'm your host, JJ, broadcasting in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. And my guest today is a Canadian rock pioneer and founding member of Juno Award-winning band Lighthouse, who will be releasing the anniversary edition of their landmark album, One Fine Morning, on November the 7th. Please welcome Canadian Songwriters Hall of Fame, Canada's Walk of Fame, and Order of Canada recipient, Paul Hoffert. How are you?
I'm good, JJ. How about yourself? What's the weather like in Vancouver?
It's pretty stellar today for early November. Well, we're just cracking on November when we're recording this, but yeah, we got some nice sun today. Very pleasant, 12, 13 degrees, comfortable, not bad. How about in your land?
Raining.
You have
Actually, we have Vancouver weather here today.
What's going on? Weather around the globe is very messed up these days.
It certainly is. Certainly is.
I guess we need more lighthouses to help things out, I guess.
Exactly. I can just play the title songs like Sunny Days, One Fine Morning.
No doubt. But this is exciting times. This is a big deal because, the day that this is actually going to be released, this interview is the day that the anniversary edition of the album comes out. And this is a huge thing, with tons of rare tracks, a really fancy vinyl edition, plus CD. I'm always about physical product. So how was it putting this together? Has this been a long process? When did this get started?
That started 10 years ago. 10 years ago, our record company is called Anthem Records. The name comes from Rush. It was their album and their record company, and they got purchased, and we got lumped with them. And they're great people, and it's great Canadian content label to be on. And we started having discussion about what would be a good way to reintroduce a lot of the Lighthouse hit recordings that were made a long time ago to our new audiences, because Lighthouse as a band has the current version of Lighthouse with Dan Clancy as a lead singer has been together for 35 years. And some of us have been with the band since 1969. So, and I don't know how that is because I'm only 28 years old myself, but somehow it all worked out in some kind of way. So what happens is that because of social media nowadays, we're able to stay in much better touch with our fans, which is fantastic. I think it's good for them, and I know it's good for us. And we get to know what they like, what they don't like, what they would like. And because most people listen to music streamed nowadays, not so much physical product, not so much CDs, growing amount of LPs and stuff like that. So Lighthouse has a lot of new fans and a lot of people who come to our concerts who don't have the background that maybe their parents' generation, might have had with Lighthouse, who is Lighthouse. And they're interested not just in listening to the streamed tracks, but they're interested in why, how do we do it? Why did we do it? What were we about? What are we about? How we write the songs? Who chose the songs? They're interested in all kinds of ancillary side information. And so we started the discussion on how best to achieve that. And there was some hiccups that made it take a really long time for the whole process to go through. But the end of the process was that we went through our archives, which we've been saving and also have saved at a couple of places that have Lighthouse archival material, York University, University of Civilization in Ottawa. And what we were able to find were 10 demo tapes that were made in 1970 for the One Fine Morning album. And what was great about it is I tracked them down. I got copies made, these little, reel-to-reel tapes that the guys in the band made. Some of them just a guitar or a keyboard and a vocal, as you could imagine, for a demo. And some of them were much more sophisticated. They had horn parts and string parts. Whatever they were, I had never heard them. And none of the guys in the band had ever heard them except the people who did the demos, because way back then, one of the things that my partner Skip, the drummer, co-founder of Lighthouse, and I were very aware of was that because on the first 3 Lighthouse albums, we had written most of the material, there's always rumbling in the guys in the band, oh, you know, we're just choosing our tunes because we get the publishing money and all of that kind of stuff. And it really bothered us because we tried to, you know, not run the band in that kind of way. So we got an outside producer, Jimmy Einer, to produce the One Fine Morning album. So we got a new outside producer. We got a new lead singer, Bob McBride, who's absolutely fantastic. And we made sure that everybody could do their demos, and they gave them all to Jimmy, the producer. And so we didn't even listen to them. We didn't have any influence on it. And so it was like a lot of fun and really interesting to hear them. And when I heard them, I just said to Brenda, listen, I was in the band. I know the guys. I know all of this. If I find it sort of interesting to listen to this, maybe there's some way we could include this as extras. And so in talking with Anthem, we basically said, why don't we do a 2 LP set, both centered around the time that this particular album, One Fine Morning, was released, the anniversary of it, because when we choose the songs for our sets that we play live, we take into account what our fans say. They basically say, oh, my favorite songs are this, this, and that. And we keep track of all of that. And when I looked at all the sets that we're playing now, all these years later, more than half the songs in our, say, 20 song-ish sets that we would do live come from this one album. So I said, why don't we make an album set, a 2-album set, so that people who don't really know much about Lighthouse, except what they've heard on streaming or on hit radio or something, you know, the singles, and then we can include a second LP with these demo recordings and a bunch of liner notes that explain a bunch of the history and what was going on at the time, and get some quotes from the other guys in the band that played on the record, you know, one of whom, Larry Smith, lives in Spain. Another, you know, Howard Shore is a very famous, you know, Grammy Award-winning and an Oscar Award-winning film composer, lives in New York. So get some comments from these disparate people, and let's give the people that buy this album something that was what albums were about, because it was a big change around the 1970s when LPs became the dominant source. Before that, there were just what we now call singles, which you had 78 RPM or 45 RPM records with one song, the hit, hopefully, and another song on the back. But nobody got any other information. There was no room on the jackets of those things to write liner notes. There was no place for photographs. And most important, when the LPs came out, you could put 10 or more songs on an LP, and you could set what the order of the songs would be. So as an artist who lived through that period and who was recording, when Lighthouse was recording, we spent a lot of time selecting material that would lump together in a compilation that was an album that had something to do with the story, the big story, as opposed to just the individual stories of the songs. So it was great, and we had that. Along came, with time, musical fashion, and people started not listening very much to LPs and not listening very much to CDs, and starting to listen to disaggregated, or taking the stuff off the CDs and LPs and putting tracks on Spotify and Apple and all the other sources that people get tracks from now. And all of a sudden, this kind of beautiful way of listening to a compilation of music and artwork and photographs went away. So what's happened now is with the passage of some more time, LPs have been making a comeback. But when they've come back incredibly improved from the way that they used to be, technically. And that's basically due to the fact that in the first run of LPs, you know, from the 70s and 80s, when they were, you know, really the way people were doing it, the quality was just terrible. I can't say it any other ways, because record companies are in the business of making money. And the cost of making a pressing of a record, of a vinyl record, had two major costs in it. One was how much plastic or vinyl you put in, because that's what it's made of, you know, and then the press comes and it stamps it down. And if the press stays down for, I'll give you some real world examples, maybe 18 or 20 seconds, then the pressing company can press so many records in 24 hours. If you do it in half of that time, they can press it in half the time. The cost of the pressing and everything is half as much. But the pressings aren't very deep. They're very shallow. So in order to make the most amount of money, they did two things. Instead of using pure vinyl, they started using ground up Barbie dolls and stuff like that, you know, had some vinyl. So the material itself wasn't holding a good impression of the recorded thing. They used less of it, which meant that the signal to noise ratio, we used to call it Rice Krispies, snap, crackle, and pop when you put on an LP. And they ran the presses without very quickly, so that they didn't use up a lot of time. Now fast forward to today, when LPs are making a comeback, albeit a small part of the market, but still, the sound is much improved because they tell you on a lot of these pressings how many ounces of vinyl, like an 18-ounce vinyl, a 12-ounce, you know, all of those things. And because they're not the primary way that people purchase music, they're more expensive now than they used to be. So we decided LP is actually a wonderful way to reissue it on LPs, but the reissue we wanted to make as good as possible. That led to the next problem, was the material that we had been mixed for the original LPs.
Mm.
So when you mix for original LPs, there was a lot of distortion and a lot of changes that you made to the sound that made it not nearly as good. Because if you have a lightweight biscuit without a big impression, if you put a lot of bass on your track, then the track becomes very wide, and when you play it back, it skips from groove to groove. So you have to compress the bass and lower the amount of bass you can put on it. On the high frequencies, if you put on what you think is a nice amount of bright high frequencies onto the pressing, you can burn out the cutting head, which costs $1,000 to like replace at the cutting plant. So we all used to mix stuff for LPs and cut the LPs at a much less than optimal situation. Now that we've got the good quality stuff, we decided that we needed to have a better quality mix. The way we did this is I've been really following the artificial intelligence as it has to do with sound recordings and using it a lot. And I found that nowadays you can actually unmix or disaggregate. So we took the original mixes, put them through this artificial intelligence technological process, which gave us back the original bass track, separate drum track, separate vocals, and so on. And then we went through a process of many months of remixing every single song from the original to get the same general mix. We're not trying to reinvent the creative part here, But before we did that, we up-resed all the things from, 16-bit to 32-bit, and, everything's super high quality so that the stuff sounds fantastic. So between the extra tracks that we have, the bonus LP and the other stuff, and the bonus tracks, we made a point of not remixing them, not fiddling around with that, because we wanted the listeners to know exactly what the producer heard when the people submitted their tracks. And we're very excited about it. The guys in the band love it because it really sounds terrific. And there's great liner notes by Ivor Hamilton at Universal Records, who's been a fan of the band for goodness knows how long, and also in the record business. So he was around when he did it. And we got quotes from, a lot of guys in the band, so that we had room on the jacket cover. There's a little booklet that comes with it, a lot of photographs from the time. And we hope that it'll have a good reception from people who get it. And as a bonus, the record company Anthem has made available a limited edition. So when these are sold out, I don't think they're going to press any more, that are identical in sound, but instead of having just the nice psychedelic colors on the vinyl itself, they're pressed individually, one at a time, and they're pressed on translucent vinyl so you can see through it. And just before they press it, they take a bunch of dots of vinyl of the colors that are on the album cover, and they just throw them onto the thing. And when they get squished in, every single record is different. So if you want the collectability version of that, you can get that as well.
Well, we have to get through the first pressing first before we get to that point. No, or are we going to get that straight away as well? This fancy, sparkly, translucent. Is that straight away, or is that to follow?
That's to follow.
That's to
And
follow.
of course, if you want to, and it is available as CDs. Some people still have a CD player.
Yeah, well, yeah. I included bunch behind me here. Well, I was gonna say that I've only been fortunate enough to hear the album in MP3 form as an advance, and I was even shocked and pleasantly surprised how fresh and dynamic and open and huge it sounded in that form. And I'm thinking, man, because I've already ordered the physical product for myself, so I can only imagine how even more phenomenal it's going to sound once I have the full product in my hand. And I don't think we can say that enough to people that are listening to this and are thinking about purchasing the album, is that, for one, this isn't just a repackaged reissue. You've already explained the amount of time, direction, and attention that's been put into this, that can't be denied. But I also want to stress that listening to the demo recordings, that often people can think, oh, it's a demo, it's going to be a bit rough, it's leftover. No, this sounds very close to finished material. Like, this sounds really, really good. These aren't just filler things to put a package together. This is worthy stuff to have as part of that collection. So to hear you have these as demos is quite impressive.
Well, thank you. We did, Lighthouse still performs, believe it or not. Hard for me to believe it, but we still do a lot of gigs. And over the last 2 or 3 weeks, we've done a couple of gigs, and the record company was able to get us a limited number of both the CDs and the LPs. And we wanted to just do a test to see if people like the cover, whatever it is, just before the official release date, I think is November 7th, I believe. And they sold out in like 5 minutes. So I think once the people hear them, that this is going to be a great way to reintroduce old fans, but also introduce some new listeners to Lighthouse.
And the track I wanted to ask about was one of the bonus tracks, All God's Children.
Fantastic track.
That
Couldn't believe how good it was, even though I played piano on it.
And did you remember that, or did that suddenly strike you when you're going through?
Totally forgot about it.
Wow.
Everybody in a band, producer says, make some demos. And because you're in a band that already has been touring and already made 3 record releases, your standards are much higher, which probably goes to your thing. You probably heard a lot of demos that might be kind of rudimentary. So in general, and we all had access to recording studios and that kind of thing to do it. So Howard Shore, the saxophone player in Lighthouse, for over 1,000 gigs, I think he told me he played with us. And Larry Smith, who was the trumpet player at the time, co-wrote this song. It's a terrific song. Because I wasn't part of because we gave Jimmy Einer, the producer, sole discretion on what to choose, because Skip and I were submitting our own material. We didn't want to be preferential in any kind of way. I never really thought about, and I never listened to the demos, so I never knew what was approved and what was not. When I fairly recently listened to All God's Children, which is really fantastic. Now that demo, because both Larry and Howard are arrangers, so they had horn parts, they had string parts, and it sounds almost like a semi-finished Lighthouse cut when you listen to their demo. And I was saying, what was Jimmy Einer, our producer, thinking when he didn't choose this song? And then when I thought back to historically where the band was at that point in time, it all made total sense, because we brought in Jimmy Einer because our first 3 records, and your listeners were probably not going to be able to understand the importance of this. Back in 1970, FM radio was just starting to be introduced. But there were no FM radios in cars, and there was no portable FM or any of that. It was just a new format. So the only music at that time that people listened to was AM radio. And if you needed to sell anything, you needed to sell it on, you had to get it on hit radio. The format of hit radio was basically 2.5 minute to 3.5 minute songs with hooks in it, even getting back a bit to flashing forward to nowadays when you think of a lot of the music that you hear. They were singles, they weren't albums, they weren't things that were meant to be listened to at length. And because we have an orchestral band with a live then a string quartet and a quartet of horns and 6 or 7 singers, there's a lot of stuff to sort of to jam into that amount of time. And because our horn players are all jazz soloists, like Russ Little, who still plays with Lighthouse, the original trombone player, played with Count Basie's orchestra. Freddie Stone, who was one of our trumpet players, left Lighthouse to join the Duke Ellington Orchestra. We have all these fantastic jazz soloists. I'm a jazz musician myself, and I do a lot of solos. Skip Prokop had all these drum solos. So on the first 3 records, we had extended solos. Not as long as when we play them live, when they just go on forever sometimes. But the average length of our songs was basically 5, 6, 7 minutes. And we did have one song that was 15 minutes long that took up a whole side of a record. Those were all what they called radio unfriendly, not friendly, because they weren't formatted as verse, chorus, hook, that kind of thing in 2.5 to 3.5 minutes. They didn't fit the format of hit radio, which was AM. And so our record company at the time, which worked hard and spent a lot of money promoting us, could sell a lot of records wherever we were performing live, and people would come and see us live, and then they'd go and buy the record and they could do it. But outside of that, we got a lot less airplay than they needed for promoting a band of our size and cost. And so after 3 albums, they said, that's it. We did our best, good luck. And so when we were looking around for new record labels, we found out that they were not very much interested in what became an FM-friendly band a couple of years later, when FM was looking for all of this kind of, prog rock and all of these other things. We would be fitting into some of those new pigeonholes. But at the time, they didn't. So our producer, Jimmy Einer, got everybody in the band together, and he said, listen, I'm willing to produce your next album, but I can't get you a deal unless you follow these instructions very carefully. And he laid out exactly what we needed to be radio AM friendly, shorter songs, more vocals, no long instrumentals, no solos. And the song that we're talking about, All God's Children, was a perfect song for the first 3 Lighthouse records. You've heard it, so you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, yeah.
The tempo keeps changing. You
Oh,
can't
yeah.
dance to it right, like slow, fast. The keys keep changing. It's got all these different sections, solos. It was exactly not what Jimmy was looking for. And in hindsight, I could see Jimmy Einer listening to that and saying, what the heck are these guys doing? We just had this meeting. We said, I told him what I'm looking for. This isn't going to work. That's my guess on why that didn't make it. Aside from that, it's a fantastic song. And in the fullness of time, I'm so happy that we could include it, because otherwise it would have been just another forgotten song. It's never been heard by anybody except the guys that wrote it, and we had that demo. And now it's going to be out there. So it's good.
Well, one reissue at a time, and I'm assuming that you've perhaps maybe found even more tracks and demos in the dungeons and various reel-to-reels here and there. Might we see at some point more of the catalog being reissued with extra material and outtakes and demos, that kind of thing, or are we just sticking to the one for now?
And that we came to with our record company, they plan. It's all based on how successful this release is going to be. One of the reasons that they ended up spending a lot of years kind of working on it and trying to make it. And I must say that they've been totally with us all the way. Any suggestions that we've had, they've basically adopted them. Any ideas, they've checked them out, and we've gone back and forth. The idea is that if it works for one fine morning, then we have another 4 or 5 albums that we could go, and they'll all be different kind of materials that we do, but then we'll be able to tell a Lighthouse story in a progressive way. But as you know, the sales of LPs, while increasing, is still pretty low. So I don't know, they're going to need to see some response. Our initial response has been fantastically positive. And if that goes on, I would say with some confidence that, yeah, we could look to maybe an invigoration of the catalog over time. But we picked this record. This is the perfect record because this is the start of Bob McBride, the start of the new Lighthouse sound that continues to be more radio friendly in all kinds of ways. But of course, nowadays we got to be friendly for streaming and for all kinds of other things. But I think that's the idea. And the LP is a wonderful format because you can put a booklet in it. You have room for a lot of liner notes. You can put photos and all of that kind of stuff in it. And it's an exciting time for Lighthouse.
For sure. But can you explain it all for some of us, I included, who would have been miniature, barely around at that point, to understand exactly not just what you were doing, but how really big and prominent your band was and still is. But at the time, it was just huge.
It was just huge. Yeah,
and I
absolutely
think, and I
huge.
think in many ways, it's perhaps been a bit maybe overlooked as far as really the impact Lighthouse had at that time. Like not just Canada, but globally, you were a big deal.
Yeah, very big deal. So I'll just mention a couple of things that may help put it into perspective. When Skip and I decided to put Lighthouse together, we were in our about 22 years old or something like that, or in our early 20s. And we were both very well known separately. Skip was a rock and roll musician, a drummer who had played with the Mamas and the Papas and the Peter, Paul and Mary and Janis Joplin and a whole bunch of and his own band, the Paupers, which were the first Canadian band to have a US manager. So they were managed by Albert Grossman, who also managed Bob Dylan, probably 10 of the biggest sort of rock and roll acts that were working at that time. And I had come up through the jazz scene. I had my first jazz LP released when I was 16 years old. And I used to be on network television with my Paul Hoffert Jazz Quartet and everything. Wrote hundreds of jingles and stuff, was working in recording studios. I wrote a couple of film scores, one of which won an award at the Cannes Film Festival. I wrote an off-Broadway musical that ran for 6 months. And while I was in New York, when my musical was running off Broadway, I went into this rock and roll, the Electric Circus, where Skip Prokop was playing, performing with his band, the Paupers, and we accidentally ran into each other. And that was the beginning of Lighthouse. We got together, and I didn't know anything really about the pop music business, but I knew how to write music for symphony orchestras. I knew all the jazz guys because they played at all the jazz clubs. I knew the young guys in the Toronto Symphony who were all taking psychedelics and playing Brahms that evening and trying to figure out where they might fit into this whole hippie sort of psychedelic musical culture that they were part of in the cohort, in their age group, but not the classical music part of it. So we thought that if we got together, it would be a very good, very efficient way to have a band that could have horns and strings. It could have the kind of orchestral additions that the Beatles and other rock and roll big artists were having when they added these studio musicians. And then in the case of the Beatles, they had to break up because they couldn't go on the road and perform, moving from Sgt. Pepper on, they didn't have the resources to go on. They could no longer do it with the Fabulous Four. And so Skip and I had this idea. Why don't we put together a band? And we both I had written film scores. Skip loved the big Westerns with the French horns coming in and the string section, as the horses come up, over the horizon and everything. I said, wouldn't it be great if we could make records that had that kind of sophistication, but could be performed live by the band? So that was the idea. So what do you do? I said, so how do you get, I don't know the business. How do you make a record? He says, oh, you have to make a demo and then you try to sell it. So we wrote 4 songs together. We came back to Toronto. We met in New York. And we went into the recording studio. We I knew the string players and the horn players, and Skip knew all the good rock and roll people. And we recorded the 4 songs and we took them back down to New York. The first record company that we went to was Verve MGM, because that was the label that Skip, the Paupers, were on. We called them 10 o'clock in the morning and we said, we made Skip called them, he knew the people. And he said, I have a new partner. We just made a demo. If we bring it down with somebody, listen to it. And they said, sure, come on down in an hour, come at 11 o'clock. So at 11 o'clock, we go down to MGM Verve. And we knew what the business was like. You assume that you're going to give your demo tape to some apprentice or secretary or somebody, and hopefully somebody may listen to one or more cuts and all of that stuff. It's not an easy thing to get through. But the A&R guy, the artist and repertoire guy, said, oh, why don't we go into the listening room? I'll listen to it now. He went in and listened to our demo and then paused, and he said, you know, this is really terrific. I love this. He says, and I get it. And I looked at Skip, and he looked at me. We didn't say anything. And he said, I know what you guys were thinking. So not knowing what he might think we were thinking, we said, oh, great. And he said, yeah, he said, you know, all us record companies, we've been making money with the big band records, with Frank Sinatra and Guy Lombardo and all the big bands. And so we closed the sales loop because every high school and every college and every university had marching bands with trumpet players and saxophone players and clarinet players, and you know, all the school orchestras had string players, and all the big bands had horn players, and most of them had string players. And so we could sell the sheet music of all of our hit records to all the school system where the kids were studying all of those instruments, and we could make money. It's called, they said, it's closing the economic. So that must be what you guys were thinking, right? So of course not, but we looked and said, yeah, that's what we were thinking. So then he said, so this is a great idea. This, because right now everybody's into this new thing called rock and roll, and it's just drums and guitars. And he said they don't teach like drums and guitars at schools. We can't, it's not good for our business. We're trying to figure out how to do it. So everybody's been talking about this new band thing, because I know Blood, Sweat, and Tears was talking about getting together. Chicago, not yet, but we were right at the forefront of that kind of thing. And he said, why don't you guys just go and have some lunch and let me play this for my colleagues, and we'll see if they agree with me, and then we'll go from there. So we went, we had lunch. And then 1 o'clock, same day as we called up in the morning to make an appointment, he ushered us into the office, into the boardroom. And in the boardroom now was the president, the vice president of finance, a bunch of people who were called stenographers in those days, who used to have a typewriter and before computers, who would take notes and then type up contracts and stuff like that. And he said, we get it, and we want to sign you guys, and there's only one condition. We think once you start playing your demo, if you shop it around, that some of the other companies will get in a bidding war, because we just think this is a great idea. So if you want to make a deal with us, we will sign you today. We will draft the contracts. If you could wait here till 5 or 5:30, and we'll cut a check. And here's what we're willing to offer you. He said, we'll give to two of you, Skip and Paul, us, because so far there was no band. It was just two of us who made a demo. $30,000 split. This morning I went online and I looked up how much $30,000 in 1969 is worth today. It's worth $250,000. So we got the equivalent of $125K each as a signing bonus, provided we would sign that day, which we did, which would have been stupid not to do. From our perspective then, we had nothing. We just had, we did a demo, right? So we signed a deal with MGM, Verve, and we're really happy. And they said, and we'll fly the whole band down to New York. We'll put you up to Times Square Hotel. In those days sounded really fantastic. It was a little less than that, but it was Times Square. And record you at Electric Ladyland, which was Jimi Hendrix's studio where he did this stuff. And okay, so he did that. And so we're on top of the world, kind of. And the next day I say, okay, so now we have a record deal. What is that everything? He said, no, we need to play live. So we'll get a band, put a band together. But my manager is this guy, Albert Grossman's most important manager in the whole business. Why don't we go see Albert? And so we go see Albert Grossman next day. And Skip introduces me and tells Albert about our idea, big band with horns and strings and everything like that. And not only that, he doesn't even have to get us a record deal. We have a record deal, and it's a good deal and everything. They're nice people. And so Albert says, terrible idea. Worst idea I've ever heard of. It's too many. I just got off the road with the Electric Flag, which was an early horn band that he was trying to manage and get. And he said, I lost $100,000 on the first tour. Too many people, too expensive. The sound systems don't do it justice. You can't, everybody has a sound system for a 4 or 5 piece band, and there's no mixing consoles that can handle all the faders. Anyway, bad idea. So we said, okay, we'll go somewhere else. On our way out of Albert's office, we meet the head of his office, this guy, Vinny Fusco. And so Vinny says to Skip, so how's everything? And Skip says, oh, it's great. This is my new partner, and we have a new band, and we just got a record deal, and we just asked Albert if he wants to manage us, and he said no. So Vinny says, well, I think it's a fantastic idea. And he said, you don't need Albert. You think Albert actually answers the phone every day? He's Albert Grossman. Every day I phone up, I answer the phone, I say, it's Vinny Fusco at the Albert Grossman Agency. And what can I do for you today? He says, I'll just manage you out of the office. It won't make any difference. Everybody think Albert Grossman's office. Albert Grossman's office. So we signed with Vinny. So now we have a record deal. We have a big management company. And we had to put together a band and get started. The next week, MGM flies Lighthouse down to start the recording. And we called it the musicians who played on the demo. And most of them are game to actually be in a band. And we start recording the band. And Vinny starts bringing in people from other record companies. And he introduces us to them, and they listen as he's starting to put down the tracks and do the mixes of the actual album. Anyway, the short story is that about a week later, Vinny says we should have a little coffee and have a chat. We have a coffee and a chat with Vinny, and he says, the record deal's all set. I said, we have RCA Victor. It's going to be $1 million. Built into that, they're going to pay off MGM, so they're just going to go away because, they give them an overrider at one point on the next couple of records or something. And you're guaranteed your first gig has to be a sold-out concert at Carnegie Hall. They're going to pay to have a new sound system built for you that can have all the inputs and outputs you need for all the instruments. We're going to buy you a truck, and on and on and on and on and on. And so you better get back to Toronto. And we got to book the Carnegie Hall date in the States and a Canadian date, to open the thing and get going. So we started off with a huge record deal. We had everything except the band. And then we put together the band. And on our first Canadian date, which was a week before Carnegie Hall, which, by the way, was sold out. They took billboards everywhere in New York. They'd spent money, and they got people to come. And it was a big success. But our first date ever was a week before that in Toronto at a place called the Rock Pile, which was a rock and roll club. And just before we were going on for our first ever live performance, we're sitting nervously in the green room, and the door opens, and as this guy, Stu Hertz, whom RCA had hired, a New York public relations guy who had a reputation of doing outlandish things, but very good things. And he said, oh, guys, before you go on, I got somebody to introduce the band. Can he come in? And we said, sure. And the door opens, and this man comes in who looks just like Duke Ellington. And I look at Skip, and he looks at me, and we look at the guy, and it's Duke Ellington. And so he said, yeah, he said, Duke has been great. I told him all about your band. He was playing, at a gig did a matinee at Massey Hall in Toronto. And I told him I'd take him to the airport. And then I told him, you guys are like the new thing in the big band era, but you've taken it into the rock and roll big band era. And Duke says, yeah, I like what you guys are doing. I don't want to be late for my plane, but he says, why don't you get on stage and I'll do the introduction. And we go behind the curtain, and Duke Ellington goes in front of the curtain. And Stu had arranged the first two rows with photographers and journalists from around the world. And they look up, and it's Duke Ellington. And Duke Ellington says, music is always evolving and jazz is always evolving. And I think these guys have the thing that it takes. So all I can say is I'm beginning to see the light house. And the curtain opened, snap, snap, snap. The next day, all over the world. So we got a great start. And then right after Carnegie Hall, Vinny was able to book us as the opening act for the Jefferson Airplane, doing 60,000 seat arenas across the United States to start building our own fan base. And that was it. We went on the road, and we did 1,000 gigs in the first 3 years, and did very well. When we went to England, we played at the Isle of Wight Festival, which was then maybe still the biggest, 300,000 people off the coast of England. And on that's the only gig that I believe we've ever had Lighthouse and Blood, Sweat, and Tears and Chicago on the same bill over the 4 days. And so I think it was called Music Makers, the British music magazine, sort of like Billboard, ran the battle of the rock big bands between the three of us, and you would vote in this, and I don't know any of the details, but Lighthouse won. So the only time that there was an actual big band playoff between the three sort of most significant horn bands at the time, Lighthouse with Strings, a little bit of difference here and there, but we're all friendly competitors. We won. So we did good in England, and then we went to Japan, and we had one of the songs on the album. One of the albums was a #1 hit in Japan. So globally in every way, but we were basically a Canadian band, and we had to be working all the time. And Canada's a big country, and so we're always doing gigs, going in, doing more stuff. We've won 3 Juno Awards, if people know what that is. We've been inducted into the Canada's Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. We're on the Walk of Fame. You put your shoe or your hand imprint. I can't remember what we did, but anyway, we do one of those. The Canadian Songwriters Hall of Fame. Lots of awards. I'm just looking around my office to see some of them. But anyway, we're very successful. But that was a long time ago. And with the changes in music, if you would have asked me then, where do I think Lighthouse would be, and where would my music be half a century later, the only thing I would know for sure is I would have no idea of what the world would be like these days. But I knew for sure nobody was going to be playing Lighthouse music and stuff, because music is a fashion like clothing. It just goes 10 years or so, and then as the new things come out, new styles. And I was right for a long time, because a lot of the music styles that came and replaced what is now called classic rock, but at the time we weren't classic rock, because we were just like rock and roll, and it wasn't yet a classic. But things like electronic dance music and disco and rap and all kinds of wonderful things, but things that didn't have storytelling in the lyric form with a chorus and a verse and stuff that you couldn't go out and hum the melody the way you could. And so country music and classic rock has sort of survived through these changes in musical styles. And there's not many, but there's still, classic rock and some country stations that are still getting people to be able to hum the melody and interact with the story. And so I'm just a lucky person in that regard, and I'm able to have a great time reaching many new audiences at different age levels. And as it turns out, the One Fine Morning LP that is just being memorialized in this anniversary edition is perfect culturally for what's going on now with Ukraine and Israel and all that. I mean, those days it was the Vietnam War, and there were the anti-war people and the peaceniks, and all this people were writing songs, and we were, writing material. And everybody was very interested in freedom and the same kind of things that are going on. So I think the timing seemed to us good to have people relate to what's going on now, and a lot of the lyrics still work.
Oh, totally work. Is very relevant with everything that's going on, no question. Now, I'd like to ask you something quickly before we wrap things up that's non-Lighthouse related, but still you related. I was digging this out, and I wanted to see if I could get any quick takes or opinions or a quick story on this.
Moxy, Under the Lights.
Yeah, I was reading that you worked on this album.
I don't think I did. Is my name on it?
Yeah, I saw there was credits for you online as part of a vocal arranger on this album. So I don't know.
I did work on the album. Can you find the date? I've done so many things.
This is like 79 or 78.
Is that what was Moxy Fruvis?
No, this was Moxy. This was the last Moxy album they did when Mike Reno joined the band before joining Loverboy.
Of course. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay.
That's a young Mike Reno right there. Right there.
It's very small, and I have my screen small. Let me make my screen bigger.
No problem. Try to get some of the glare out of the way.
Okay, now open it for me. Yes, I see I recognize the album.
Yeah, this is just a reissue. Yeah, there was the 3 albums before, live and stuff. But yeah, the Lights, 1970.
It was part of a huge Canadian contingent of musicians, songwriters that in the 1970s and onward. I mean, 1970s was around the time Skip and I, my co-founder of Lighthouse, had something to do with the CanCon regulations, Canadian content. And when CanCon came in, all of a sudden, all of the radio stations who previously had never played any Canadian content, because they would just buy Billboard magazine, look at the top 10 of what they were playing in the States and play those records. And the record companies were putting them out because they were the Canadian branches of the American record companies, and they didn't have to spend any new money doing promotion or marketing. So Canadians weren't really getting anything. With CanCon, when the radio stations had to start playing some Canadian records, bands like Moxy. Lighthouse was kind of just before that, and we just had a horseshoe up, I won't say where the sun shine is what they say.
We'll say the timing was right. How about that?
The timing was right for Lighthouse.
Yes.
But then all kinds of bands like Moxy came up, and they were fantastic. And were able to get airplay not only in Canada, but globally. And it was wonderful to be part of that whole scene. And I think we all really benefited from it at the time. Yeah.
I appreciate the insight. The insight's been awesome, and I've really appreciated our time today, Paul. This has been awesome. I'm sure the stories are endless. We might have to do a part 2 or 3 at some point, because there's still a lot, I'm sure, to touch on, or maybe as future reissues slowly start to resurface. We'll keep our fingers crossed for that. But in the meantime,
Anytime, I'll talk to you anytime, JJ.
but in the meantime, one fine morning, deluxe edition, anniversary edition with some brilliant demos and outtakes, that is released on November the 7th on Anthem Music. And this has just been great. I'm looking, you got shows. We can't forget, you're playing in Guelph on February the 5th. You're playing in Pickering on February the 21st, and in St. Catharines on April Fool's Day. Do we have other shows in the works?
Yes, there's a lot. We're waiting to set the dates because of when the album is going to be available and where it's going to be available and stuff like that. But there's going to be a lot of dates in 2006. Most of them are going to be going in 2006.
That's awesome. Well, thanks for your time, Paul. This is JJ. I am JJ, and this is Different Stages Radio.
Have a good day.